Welcome to the Digital Kids Meetup for March of 2021. We are 1 year into the pandemic. It has been a life-changing event for everybody around the world that we've all shared. And it's also been a time of radical change for, everybody, but especially for kids and families who have been locked up together and who are experiencing the new reality of digital platforms and ways that they can connect even though they're remote and isolated. So we've tackled a couple of different types of technologies related to this. We looked at ed tech. We've talked about kids voice experiences, and one topic that kept bubbling to the top was privacy. As kids are connecting in these spaces and they want to play and they want to learn other things, how can you keep them safe? If you're bringing these type of platforms into classrooms and there's other kids there, how can you ensure that consent is being given in those platforms as well? These are all the types of questions that we've wanted to tackle as a community for some time. And we are super honored to have a panel of experts from the leading privacy and safe harbor areas, as well as trend experts in kids' digital spaces, who are going to be sharing about their companies and also having a lively discussion about where we are with kids' privacy and how the pandemic is going to change things moving forward. So this is a subject that's super close to my heart. I'm not actually a parent, but I'm sort of a mini mom to a sister who's 11 years younger than me, and watching her sort of struggle with privacy concerns and trying to become an adult in the digital ecosystem when I was a young adult really catalyzed my love of working on kids platforms and brought me into the industry 12 years ago. So with that, I'm going to just jump in a little bit. I want to share for anybody who's new, welcome, what the Digital Kids Meetup community is. This group was started about 10 years ago by creativity, and it was called Silicon Valley Apps for Kids. There were many meetups that happened in the first 3 or 4 years of its existence, and then it went dormant for a little while. And about 3 years ago, we partnered with JP Stoops, who is running the Smart Toys Meetup in San Francisco, to revive it, under the understanding that, kids were not playing in the same ways anymore. They weren't looking at channels as isolated things. It wasn't apps or game platforms or toys. They were just looking at everything as a connected experience of play. And so the community that was servicing them really had to get together and think differently. So we try to unite learning experts and designers and entrepreneurs and the business side of things, the development side of things, the manufacturers, everybody who gets together, who can even create policy decisions together to advocate for this group and to create really great experiences moving forward. And that's the purpose of the meetup. When the pandemic happened, we quickly shifted to hosting these online, thanks to the Zoom platform. And it's really opened up our community. We've seen so many new people come in, and it's really brought us closer together, because instead of being in a room where you might get to talk to 1 or 2 people, now we can go around and have round robins where everybody gets to introduce themselves and share what they're passionate about and ask questions of each other. So I love that roundtable feel. We're going to preserve that through this meeting. I'm going to ask that for the first hour when we're doing the panel and focusing on the experts who've prepared slides and done a lot of work to prepare the subject for us, that we all be really respectful of them and stay on mute. But in the last half hour of the event, I want everybody to come out and to share questions. Feel free to be on camera for that, or to send them over to Liana, who's going to be facilitating the meeting, and we can ask them for you if you're not comfortable doing so. I'll do a quick intro of who I am. I am Caitlin Goodekunst. I stepped into managing the meeting with JP about 2 years ago. There's going to be some changes moving forward for the meetup group. I'm actually going to be leaving creativity to pursue a new opportunity. And I was leading marketing and business development for creativity. But Charlie's been a good friend of mine for 8 to 10 years. He organized one of the most fabulous conferences that I've ever been to in the past, called the World Congress of Play, and has a very like-minded attitude about how we approach play and these different types of transmedia experiences. So I'm super excited to maintain our partnership together, though it is not an employment fashion. And then JP is actually going to be stepping aside because he's taken a full-time job that doesn't give him as much time for this. So thank you so much to JP for all of the amazing intellectual stimulation that he brought to this, and all the people that he introduced to us. I'm going to miss his facilitation and sort of mind share that we had, but extremely excited to be working with creativity. So just as a quick introduction to who creativity is, Charlie started the company in 1998 to provide development and design services to the toy industry and beyond. They continue to innovate and to expand in their services that they deliver. And about 4 years ago, we started building voice-first experiences. So continue to look at new platforms for kids and figure out how we can make great play experiences. And in that time, the company shipped over 7,000 products and had 135 products that they worked on be TOTY nominated. So very high achieving, great vendor for the toy industry, entertainment, and tech studios. Charlie, I'd love to invite you to say a few quick words and share about your experience in the toy industry and for the meetup moving forward.
Well, I'll be quick and brief because there's much more interesting stuff to come. Thanks for the introduction. And thank you, Caitlin and Liana, for hosting this event. And so far, so good. These things always scare me for technical reasons. Caitlin shared with you that she's leaving creativity. Of course, that's broken our hearts. Anybody who knows her knows that's a huge loss for us. But we're fortunate, all of us, that she's going to continue to engage through this meetup group and stay in touch with this industry. Hopefully she'll come back, not necessarily to us, but to our world down the road. Yeah, Caitlin covered me. I founded this company with my wife 20 plus years ago. We do content and software development and design and gameplay. And we've seen a lot of changes in the way kids play and the way content is delivered. We've tried to help both lead and follow with our customers in handling these changes and making this a good world for kids to grow up in. I'm going to stop there. Thank you again, Caitlin.
Thank you, Charlie.
Amazing. And Liana for helping host this. And,
Caitlin, can I ask Charlie one question?
Sure.
Just to pick his brain a little bit, what would you say, given your longevity and experience in this field, is the most important thing to have in a voice experience for kids?
I'm not sure I'm the expert to answer that question. And honestly, I've been letting Caitlin lead the way, and I would ask her that question on the voice experience side, or Josh Garrett on our team. I've been kind of the toy guy. And you know, my short answer is make it fun. Humor, engagement, challenge, good gameplay, something that makes kids keep coming back. That would be my short answer to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I know there's a couple of people here, at least from the voice industry. So I'd love to tackle that one, as well as facial recognition and other emerging types of interactions that are powered by AI as a specific topic in the panel. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, on to the content. So we are through the introduction phase, 5 minutes behind. But we're going to shift right now into lightning talks. We're going to start with Kate from SuperAwesome, and then go over to Dona from CARU'S, and then Shai is going to come back on stage from kidSAFE, and then we'll have Denise from PRIVO, and then we're going to bring them all back up on stage and close out this PowerPoint so we can see their faces and ask them a lot of interesting questions. The Q&A will open up around 12 p.m. PST, 3 p.m. EST, so feel free to send your questions to Liana Wilcox directly, or to all panelists, and she'll collate them there, and we'll let you know when you can come on stage and ask them directly. Thank you. And with that, I'm super excited to turn this over to Kate so that she can start sharing about SuperAwesome.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for the invite today, Caitlin. This is a great event, and it was great to meet you back in the pre-pandemic at Women in Toys. So that's we're glad to have made this acquaintance. So I'm Kate O'Loughlin. I am COO of SuperAwesome, and we are making the internet safer for kids. Caitlin, if you want to go to the next slide for me, that would be great. And what that means is that we are helping creators, inventors, product people, marketers, make sure that anytime they are engaging a kid, that they can do so safely and compliantly. What we have seen and why we started the company now 8 years ago is that most of the internet was built for adults by adults, and kids have been a very underserved audience, either forgotten or purposely neglected because for some reason they're considered a harder audience or and not as worthy audience. And we don't think that's right. So what we've been doing is building tools so that if you want to market your product to kids, that you can do so in a safe way, in a way that's compliant, but also is cool and engaging. If you have a product that you want to use ads to generate revenue, if you have a game or an experience in which you want to monetize it through ads, we can help make sure that you do that, again, safely and compliantly. If you're trying to build a community or you're trying to engage creators around your product, we help there. And then if you have a product that needs a piece of personal information from a kid, we can help make sure that that piece of data is consented by a parent before you collect it. And so we've been using our tools to help lots and lots of different companies around the world, lots in the toy space, in foods, in gaming, in electronics, really anywhere that a kid is an important audience. And so we're really proud of that. We're now part of Epic Games, and that acquisition happened in September, and we're super happy to be part of their scale and scope. Super exciting times for us. Caitlin, if you want to go to the next slide. And so when we work with a company or work with a product person or a creator, we're often asked some set of these questions, or usually it comes down to all of them. The first is like, how do I understand kids these days? Kids these days, as Caitlin was talking about, and as Charlie has probably seen over his career, have really changed, and they're changing in their preference, how they like to spend their time and what devices they're spending their time, how they talk to each other, how they form relationships. And so we provide some insight into that audience. It's hard to get data, honestly, about kids because of most of the tools that kind of help understand digital audiences. Again, we're built for adults. And then once we help answer that question, we often then help like, well, how can I reach them? How can I tell this really important, influential audience about my service, about my product? And then after I reach them, how can I make sure that they think it's cool and I get some feedback and they become part of an engaged community to my experience? And after that, we often get asked, or the circle might start in one of these different places, but it's like, okay, if I have my product, how can I make sure that it in itself is safe and that it's connected and that it's modern and that is servicing sort of the needs of today's kids? So as an example, sort of some of the insights, I just brought a few along to give you some maybe hot takes from kids during the pandemic, which we get asked about a lot these days. One of the things that we're seeing is that all kids are gamers now. So even if they don't think of themselves as a gamer, they are definitely spending time playing games, whether they're doing mobile casual games, whether they're spending time on their console, or maybe they're inside one of the new metaverses, inside of an online world like a Roblox or a Minecraft. 88% of kids 7 to 9 play video games. And so it's not probably not a surprise, but lots of questions around, well, how can I engage with kids in these gaming areas or bring this concept of gaming into my product, but make sure that I'm doing it in a safe way, again, that's cool. So the insight here that we're seeing is that gaming is really, really eclipsing like good old linear television. So if you're a marketer, spending your marketing dollars on TV versus in a gaming world or in connection with some kind of gaming experience, we're seeing that that's a more fruitful and a more sort of modern way to reach kids is because that's where they're spending their time. Not only is TV decreased, but now gaming time is even more than TV time ever was. Caitlin, if you want to go to the next slide. And so what we see in the pandemic is generally lots and lots of screen time, of course, gaming, but also then sort of watching Netflix and watching YouTube on the big screen or on a tablet or on our phone. There's lots and lots of screen time. It's increased 50% since last year when pre-pandemic. We don't think that's going to decrease anytime soon. The water gates are opened, and the allotment of screen time in many families is really now sort of not necessarily uncapped, but much more than it ever had been previously. And so what that's created, we've seen, is that screen time isn't necessarily like the fruit of what kids really want, because they sort of get it all the time. What they want now is physical playtime and physical offline connections with family. And so what we're seeing in some of the insights in talking to kids and parents now is that, yes, screen time is going to be important and kids are going to spend a lot of their hours a day, but that connection between the physical and the digital is really an important need from the kids and also needs from parents, right? They feel a lot of guilt around what's going on and how much screen time. They know that screen time in a digital experience can be a real source of education. It can be a real source of social connection, and that's what's keeping kids sort of sane when they can't be going to school. They know it's a place where they're getting a lot of entertainment time or just time for a parent to go and work, calls coming from screen. And so it's important, and it's not going to go away, but there's a real moment in trying to figure out the handshake between physical play and digital play in the moment. So these are two examples of insights that we're seeing lately that are really pretty interesting and neat to us, and sort of then might be considered by you as you're thinking as a product person, as you're being an inventor, and how you might connect with this audience or build for this audience. Caitlin, if you want to go to the next page. So then I want to just talk a little bit about often questions that we get at SuperAwesome and sort of the next part of that circle that I had shown before. So yes, we're going to help with insights and provide this out so we can kind of all understand this audience. But then after that, when you're reaching kids, or sorry, the formatting didn't quite translate in our slide import there. How do we actively engage them, or how do you build a connected experience safely? I wanted to just go through some common things that we hear about, and this is actually sort of, I think, a tee up to what we're going to be talking about as a panel later, and maybe some acronym decoding, which I'm going to just take a moment to do here and to set it up as Caitlin had asked me to do. So marketing to kids, or reaching kids and telling them about your cool experience or about your cool product. It's really imperative to do so. Often some companies will think, well, if I just talk to mom's shopper after all, she's the one with the credit card, she's going to be the one who buys my product or buys my experience or buys into it, lets her kid do it. But really, you're sort of missing the point of connecting with your end consumer. So it's a real imperative to actually think about how you're going to connect with the kid, the player, the consumer of your thing. But in thinking about how you're going to reach these kids, you're generally going to be first confronted with, well, okay, how am I going to find these kids without breaking data privacy laws? Because there are special requirements for how you can reach kids, especially in advertising. It comes up a lot. Most of the tools used for marketing are often trying to find a specific user using some kind of piece of data that can follow that user sort of across the internet to find them again and keep telling them about your marketing message. But those are the things that aren't allowed for a kid's audience, because that's the sort of stuff that is collecting, those sort of marketing tools are collecting personal information for kids, which isn't allowed under the US law, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, unless you have parental consent. You can't know who an individual kid is by their name, their social, their mailing address, their email address, or even their browser cookie, or their precise lat long that you might collect off of a mobile phone without first getting parental consent. So you can advertise to kids. We get that question a lot, is, well, can I even advertise to kids? It seems like maybe I can't. You can do. You just have to make sure you're using a specialty approach that doesn't use some of the marketing tools that fuel off of personal information, typically with adults.
Kate, I'm wondering if we should have the other panelists explain some of the other aspects of this slide, just to make sure that everybody has a little bit of time, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely, Caitlin. And I just want to say, the plight of the creator or of the inventor, the product person who's making a cool experience is to sort of navigate many of these areas, and we'd love to help you out. So give us a ring. We're at superawesome.com if you want to go to my last slide there. I'm looking forward to our panel discussion after we hear from Shai and Dona and Denise.
Thank you so much. And I also want to point out that you have an amazing newsletter that goes out and shares a lot of insights on a monthly basis. And I value that so much. And if people want to follow that, that's such a great thing. And sorry about the formatting on your slides. Everything was hard to import. I'm going to turn it over to Dona now from CARU to talk a little bit about her platform.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks for the invite. So I do want to briefly discuss kind of who CARU is, and I know a lot of people think that CARU is a standalone organization. We are not. We are part of BBB national programs, and here you can see some of our other programs, all self-regulatory or co-regulatory. So we are part of a large organization that is committed to industry self-regulation across industries, both on the advertising and privacy side. CARU is uniquely situated because we are the only program that sits on both the advertising and privacy side. And for many years, as many of you all know, advertising and privacy in the kids space could be siloed, and there was no intersection. And now clearly we cannot have them completely siloed and separate. Ad practices oftentimes are what getting companies in trouble on the privacy side. So CARU is kind of uniquely situated to address both aspects of what marketers and content creators are dealing with. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. So specifically, let's talk about, what is CARU, the Children's Advertising Review Unit? A very, very brief history about who we are. We were founded in 1974, really to support children's self-regulation in children's advertising space. And this came about because there was a lot of talk, both by consumer advocates as well as legislators, about what was happening in the kids space and the fact that they just don't understand what's being advertised to them, that we really wanted to talk about truthfulness and deceptive practices towards kids. So we were created to really develop this program with industry to help companies comply with the laws and the guidelines that protect children from deceptive or inappropriate advertising. And then later on, we also developed guidelines to address what was happening with kids in an online environment with regards to data that's being collected. We do investigations. Many of you have probably seen some of our cases. We did the TikTok case a few years ago, which ended in a referral to the FTC, which ultimately resulted in their significant fine against TikTok. So since COPPA was enacted in the last 20 years, CARU has done over 220 COPPA-related cases alone, in comparison to probably the FTC's roughly 50 cases. So we've been fairly active in this. You can go to the next slide. So again, we've talked about COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which went into effect in 1998. In 2000, CARU was the first FTC-approved COPPA safe harbor. But if you roll that back a little bit, in 1994, CARU started developing investigations and cases with regards to children's online data protection issues. And then in 1996, we published our online privacy guidelines, which then served as a basis for COPPA. So we've been doing this for quite some time from day one. So, and our guidelines undergo review by industry, right? So again, working as a self-regulatory body, we've worked very closely with industry on how our advertising guidelines become adopted. So you can go to the next slide. So an overview of kind of how our COPPA safe harbor operates, and all the safe harbors, the three of us on the call today, we all have a mandate from the FTC as approved COPPA safe harbors. There are minimum guidelines that we all have to adhere to. How we work with our safe harbors, I think, is very similar. I think we're all in the trenches with our safe harbors. And I think one of the things that's most interesting is that we all get a lot of questions from companies, but being a safe harbor Operating a safe harbor is not a moneymaker. So let's be clear about that. It is not a moneymaker. I think the cost of doing business in the kid space, whether you're an advertiser, a content creator, I really, and I say this all the time, that I don't think the cost of doing business and the cost of compliance is ever truly contemplated when either legislations or best practices or laws are being implemented. And it's unfortunate, because I think that if you took all the 7 safe harbors in the US, we probably, and Shai and I have talked about this a couple of times, we probably collectively represent less than 15%, and I think I'm being generous, of companies that are actually in the space, right? I think there are tons and tons and tons of companies who have either chosen to handle compliance with COPPA on their own. Many companies don't know anything about it, which I think we saw with the YouTube case with the FTC. We saw an emergence of content creators who knew nothing about their obligations to comply with COPPA. So, I think we all have a lot to do with regards to educating the space. So I think this forum is one good way to do that, and I think it's really good. But these are some of the things that we do with safe harbors, where we're doing audits and we're doing tracking assessments. We obviously regularly monitor. We are all obligated to give the FTC annual reports. We do educational access, and obviously, again, going back to kind of advertising, we are uniquely situated because we both have privacy and ad lawyers who can look at everything, look at what you're doing collectively, both on the privacy side and the advertising side, to see what we do, how we do it, how you do it, right? And where we can give guidance on how best to make sure your ad practices follow particular guidelines, and how you remain COPPA compliant, and how there's a convergence. And one of the things that we do with companies, and you go to the next slide, is our pre-screening services for child-directed advertising, right? So getting ahead of the game, getting your ads in front of us, whether your ads are collecting data or not, your ads have to comply with the CARU'S advertising guidelines. So we're making sure that when we do the review, that you are meeting our guideline standards. But it's one way to get ahead of the whole situation, right? You get your ad in front of us, whether it's a script, whether it's a full beta version, whatever it is. We can look at the whole campaign, and it's, a quick turnaround is usually 24 to 48 hours. So it's relatively easy and straightforward and simple, but we do think that it's a lot of companies in this space find it very helpful with regards to dealing with what they're doing on the ad side. And if they're going to put those ads in products that have to be COPPA compliant, obviously we're looking at the whole picture. So you go to the next slide, the last slide. So here's my contact information. I will plug that our CARU'S conference is coming up in June, and it will be an international conference because we're virtual. So this is probably a good opportunity for us to have a conversation about what a child is from a global standpoint. So we're looking forward to having really great conversations about that. So that's CARU'S.
Thanks, Dona.
Sure.
I know it's a little basic, but can you just quickly describe what a safe harbor is exactly? Because I don't know if we've defined that yet.
Sure, absolutely. So under COPPA, there's a provision that allows companies to apply to be a safe harbor, which essentially means that you create standards that minimally meet the bar of what the law requires. I think all safe harbors raise the bar in some way or another, right? If the bar is here, we're allowed to go a little bit higher. We are essentially kind of cops on the beat as well for the FTC. I think over the years I've taken issue with that, because I think we're so busy working with the companies that we're working with to make sure they're compliant. It's difficult to actually police the environment as a whole, but I think we all try and do that. But we are companies who help other companies comply with the guidelines. And if you are following our guidelines, if we've audited you and you see our seals on websites and mobile apps and things like that, essentially the benefit of being in a safe harbor is that you're shielded from FTC investigations and fines. Typically in the past, that has sometimes translated also to state level investigations with regards to COPPA. It doesn't always, but it has in the past sometimes. But essentially that's really what it is shielding you from possible investigations and fines by the FTC, right? They'll call us up if they see one of our companies who may be possibly in violation of COPPA. Now, I think there's an analysis with regards to how egregious the behavior may be. conversations will happen with the FTC, right? If it's an easy fix, if it's a company that we can say, look, here's proof of our audit, here's proof of the work that we did, this was an oversight, whatever it is, we can usually walk the FTC through an inquiry. But that's really what the biggest benefit of being in a safe harbor, not just keeping you compliant, but making sure that you're above board in your practices and protected from fines.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think that was super valuable to frame the rest of the conversation. Shai, I know you have more things to add to this as well, so I'm switching to your slides now. Please share about kidSAFE.
Thank you, Caitlin. And just to comment on a couple of things that Donna had mentioned in regards to kind of the percentage of the industry that we probably represent as participants in safe harbors. 15% is probably an ambitious number, but what's interesting is of that 15%, I wonder how much revenue that 15% clientele generates across the industry. Now, if you take out, assuming you take out the big guns like YouTube and Alexa, so it might actually be a more significant number as far as the overall membership that we have across our members. The other thing I want to point out, Donna, is you had mentioned that there are some companies that know nothing or know very little about COPPA and COPPA compliance. And then there are lots of companies that know a lot, but neglect or choose not to comply, whether it's because they have business objectives that they're trying to achieve and they're willing to take some risks. And I'm sure you would agree with that assessment. So, with that, I'll share a couple words about kidSAFE. We were formed in 2010. Just around the time that the mobile app ecosystem was starting to blossom. We saw a unique opportunity to launch a certification service that was not only focused on privacy, but also underlying best practices around online safety. There was concern amongst parents that kids were spending too much time on devices or starting to spend too much time. There was concern that they're going to run up bills on their credit cards. And there was also great concern of them possibly interacting with strangers and being exposed to unsafe interactions online. So that's kind of how we were formed. If you can jump to the next slide, please. Similar to SuperAwesome, our mission is to improve the internet and digital ecosystem for kids around the world. We do this in a somewhat unorthodox way, I would say, whereas some companies like SuperAwesome and others out there, especially nonprofits, are very active in educating consumers. We're very active in partnering with companies in the industry to help them design their products from the outset in a way that's safe and privacy friendly. Next slide, please. As far as who we are as a certification service, as has been mentioned, we are a COPPA safe harbor for kids and family technologies. As to Donna's point, that helps protect our members from the threat of FTC enforcement. I do want to point out, though, that it's not all-encompassing. So although there is no private right of action under the COPPA law, that hasn't stopped some plaintiffs' firms from trying to bring civil lawsuits, class action lawsuits under COPPA. And some of those cases have been thrown out. In the case of TikTok, some of them have been settled. So it's important to be mindful of other potential liabilities under COPPA, even if there's really no legal basis for them. We have, through our certification badges, we have established a community of products and services and brands, of course, that place priority on safety and privacy and security, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Through our seals that have been dispersed around the web across our membership, we achieve nearly 150 million seal impressions per month, reaching 200 countries. So we have quite a bit of visibility globally and seal recognition. What we've achieved as far as over the last 10 years, and as Donna mentioned, or I'm sure Denise will talk about as well, we've all been in this industry for a very long time. In the short time that I founded kidSAFE in the last 9 to 10 years, we have become a leading provider of safety and privacy certification services to the growing market of kid-focused technologies, as well as a trusted and recognized symbol for parents, educators, and children around the world. Next slide, please. I think what's also important to highlight is how we work across all digital platforms. So our certification is not limited to just a website or mobile app. We work with all kinds of IoT devices, from wearables to robotics, lots of ed tech and learning platforms, VR, AR, and everything across the spectrum. Next slide, please. And including voice technologies. We think we're unique in 4 key ways. We've become a globally recognized brand, the strength of our kidSAFE mark. We are experts in child online safety and privacy. We have attorneys on our staff as well as community experts. Behind the scenes, we use a proprietary auditing technology which helps accelerate the review and certification process for our members. And through our vast network of members, there are lots of network opportunities, both through introductions that we make between our members, but also through micro events that we have from time to time. Next slide, please. Here are our sort of 3 core services, badges at the present time. The COPPA, kidSAFE Plus COPPA certified badge is our flagship service, our most popular, and it's the most prestigious and most thorough. At this level of membership, we cover sort of 3 buckets of compliance and best practices, one being online safety, having to do with any social features, advertising content, content and advertising practices, as well as parental controls. At the COPPA level, we also look very closely at data collection, privacy practices, due diligence procedures of third-party service providers. And then ultimately, finally, we also help assess the data security posture of the products that work with us. We offer some other badges as well, which are not quite as exemplary as the COPPA badge. And those are mainly intended for companies that either don't have the budget to spend for a more thorough audit, or perhaps are not operating within the US and therefore don't have an immediate need to address COPPA compliance per se. Next slide, please. Here's a sort of a brief snapshot of some of the members that we have, that we work with, the clients that we work with across the globe. As you can see from this slide, it's quite a bit of variety in terms of the vertical that these companies operate within. For example, at the top level, you see lots of entertainment brands, TV networks, very popular brands in the kids and family industry. The next row down, you see lots of integration between physical and digital play. Third row, you see lots of streaming on demand platforms, including some on the audio front like Pinna. Next row, we work with lots of social networks and platforms, and so on and forth. That Kidomi and Alcatel row represents wearables and tablet devices and geo-trackers. So we have quite the spectrum across the types of verticals that we're working with in helping them ensure compliance. Next slide, please. That's how to get in touch. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Shai. I'm going to turn it over now to Denise from PRIVO. So Denise, please share about PRIVO.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you for inviting me. And it's really a pleasure to be on the panel with a number of people who really believe in kids first. And I know that to be the case of all the people that are represented on the panel. So thanks again. I guess what I'd like to say first is I'm the co-founder and CEO at PRIVO. PRIVO is an acronym for Privacy Vaults Online. I'll talk a little bit about our solutions as we go. But what's really important is that we have a yes, you can attitude. Yes, you can effectively engage with minors and protect their privacy at the same time. And that's really an important approach that we feel that we take here. Next slide. So the solutions themselves, allow us to help protect and enable minors, protect, button up the brands, and build for a brighter future. And I've seen others talk about an ecosystem approach. I really do believe that an ecosystem is what's required to make this work overall. And it takes a village is the statement, you know, in the past. I think it does in this regard. But if I were to say, you know, as a company, we're enabling our brands, our customers to maximize the digital access and engagement, but preserving the privacy rights of the children and families. Next slide. So we celebrated our 20th anniversary. So I might just be the oldest entrepreneur on this call today. I'm showing my age here, but really excited, trusted and proven. Both of our certification and tech solutions have been acknowledged by some really great organizations. And we work with a whole host of companies, but thought we would put some here that will give a flair, like Shai had, of some of the types of organizations that we might be working with, whether they're small startups, small startups that become very large, or some of the bigger enterprise companies that are might consider themselves more general audience, but find themselves tiptoeing into the children's space. Next slide. So the two solutions that we have are really becoming one of a privacy tech solution suite. But there's some technology and some human interaction in that. And we've typically operated as complementary services. The privacy tech side of the house is just that, it's all tech. And the compliance side is our Kids Privacy Assured program. So next slide, we'll talk a little bit about that. Under the compliance program, I'm really lucky to have my Vice President of Compliance, my DPO and Chief Privacy Officer offices operate just outside of the UK, so close by the SuperAwesome folks. And in doing so, we offer, you know, we found ourselves looking at COPPA, finding an overlap to GDPR, finding an overlap to student digital, but just enough difference between them that it was important to have programs that really drilled down specifically into those areas. So we think and we believe we are the the only operational program that offers a GDPR kids program. And when we come in on that side of the house, it's really a readiness program. There isn't a clear certification approach right now in Europe. So we really help people get ready for it, from, their DPIAs, their risk analysis. It's a complete look at their information society service, their ISS, as it relates to children, because children, of course, have all the same rights as we do as adults. Our student digital privacy program just relaunched in January. We're seeing a lot of interest there because there's a tremendous amount of regulation outside of COPPA that needs to be addressed. And then, of course, the signature COPPA program. Next slide. On the tech side of the house, we are an identity and consent management service. Our systems, our technology was originally put into our application for FTC approval as a safe harbor. So we've been calling out and delivering technology since 2004. At this point, we are a hub of APIs and SDKs you can pull together to drop into your own identity services to add consent. You can add kids to your adult accounts. You can use us as, all API driven just for components of the flow. The Smart Age Gate is an interesting one for us because we have some intellectual property. I'm really proud to say I've got 3 patents under my belt in this space. And with those patents, devices associated to children's age and used to gate access is the patent that we started, putting into place back in 2009. So we're really excited about that. We have a single sign-on registration capabilities, managing verifiable parental consent. You can call our identity verification widget into your own service just to handle verification of adults, of minors. So it's a configurable suite of services. Next slide. Back to the yes, you can. allow, block children, obtain custodial consent, validate minors' identity, build and manage lifelong relationships, perhaps make your offering a little more to the edge of, yes, you can engage children, and that will involve some data along the way. Next slide. So we are here. We have a great newsletter too, Caitlin. I know we love the SuperAwesome newsletter and the information that comes from that. I also think my team does a really great job of putting out a bi-weekly newsletter that's complementary to what we see from the organization. And we have lots of blogs talking about, your age gate, know your audience, and the like. We also have a jurisdictional age imagery that can help you understand what to do in each state. So visit the website, a lot of good information there. Look forward to the panel and the Q&A.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. As everybody can see in the audience, we have assembled some of the top experts in this field. I love that you mentioned the shared expertise and passion for protecting kids and creating these solutions so that companies can really focus on the engagement side of that and not worry about doing so in a way that isn't going to be jeopardizing kids' ability to become happy adults in the future. So thank you for noticing that that's what everybody here shares. I love that. I'm going to stop sharing and turn into the moderator now and just pull up my questions for everybody. Okay, I'm going to start with you actually, Denise. Thank you for being the caboose of the lightning talks, but we'll start with you about our questions. So the first one is just talking about so Data Privacy Day was on January 28th, and I know you held an event for that. We mentioned a few times in the lightning talks just how this space has evolved since kids started to play online. But as we're coming out of the pandemic, obviously there's rapid change and acceleration on this idea of change. What are you seeing from consumers and their awareness of this space, and how they might be becoming more or less sensitive to data privacy and their thoughts about it?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say that privacy's in. I started 20 years ago. Can you imagine running around talking about children's privacy 20 years ago? I don't know that anybody knew what any of this meant back then, way ahead of mobile. But what I see now are people in general. I mean, my 83-year-old mother is recognizing that privacy matters online as she's doing her, QVC and HSN manipulation of keeping that going, as probably many of us with older parents are off doing. So I guess what I would say is that it's not just kids, right? In general, people are saying, what are the big tech companies doing with our data? What do they know about us? What do you mean they can shut us down if we're saying something that somebody might not agree with? I think people are becoming more aware. And then, of course, the pandemic, I mean, it's thrown all of us into our houses, not just the kids and what they're having to deal with, but all of us working from home, the kids in the house. I mean, do people really have their privacy hygiene in order in the home to even keep their workplace safe? So I think we're ripe for a lot of good things to happen for consumers in general. Yeah,
no, I love that response and the focus on age. I think that brings up a question which I'd love to ask Dona actually. I worked at Leapfrog and at several companies in the past where we designed for different age children, and every kid develops at a different pace. So how do you define what makes a child? How is that defined by the FTC and even with some of the other regulation globally? And how can people approach designing for children of different ages while they're thinking about their solution? And Dona, again, that question's for you.
Right. So obviously under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, under COPPA, we're dealing with under 13-year-olds, right? So from 12 on down. I think that when you work with companies who are trying to figure out who their child audience is, sometimes it's the really young set, sometimes it's the whole range, sometimes it's the older set, that the 11 to 12-year-olds. I I think what's important to recognize is that despite technology, the evolution of it, what hasn't changed is how a child's brain evolves, right? That's the same. That has always remained the same. That's consistent. And I would argue that we should probably be looking at even smaller bite sizes of age groups when you look at this, if COPPA is, 12 and under, where do we begin? Where does it start? Engagement with children with devices starts very young. Children, my 2-year-old nephew knew when he grabbed my iPhone what the icon was for photographs, right? They learn that very quickly. Iconography speaks to children at a very early age, and they're able to engage that way. So I think that we need to look at what the age range is. I mean, look, there's a lot of conversations right now about raising the age of COPPA. And my fear is that we're going to start treating a 16-year-old like a 6-year-old in an online environment. We don't do it offline. We shouldn't do it online. And we need to figure that out, right? And I think what's happened in the EU under GDPR, they've created this almost untenable environment for a lot of companies when you have countries that are choosing between 13 and 16. And what does that model look like? How do you do parental consent? How do you do engagement? How do you do this, right? And it's again, very cost, it's the burden of compliance and the cost of doing it is, I think, very difficult for companies. I think when the COPPA rule was amended in 2013, I think we saw an initial drop off because companies found it so difficult to just deal with those minor changes. So I think as technology evolves, it's becoming more and more challenging. But addressing what the appropriate age is, I think we found it. For the last 20 years, we've figured out, okay, 13 is the cutoff. There are plenty of people who are going to argue that that's not the right age, but it's where we're at. And I think that if we start treating kids differently online than we do offline, we're going to create a really untenable situation. And for companies who have for years said, we're not going to engage in the 13 set, we're going to age gate, or we're going to operate as a general audience site, we're going to operate under an actual knowledge standard. If all of a sudden they have to change that because the age gets raised, imagine how businesses are going to be impacted. And I would argue also that the 13 to 17 age group is probably in many ways more vulnerable than the under 13 set because they have buying power and they have probably more access to screen time. So what are we doing about that set? I don't think the answer is to raise the age of COPPA. I think that's a different set of rules, different guidelines. But I think as developers, we just need to be cognizant of who our audience is and how we're working with them, right? And it doesn't always have to be at the center of what the COPPA rule is, right? There's plenty of room for creativity, plenty of room to work around the edges, right? We always say, my team always knows, I say, it's about getting you to yes, right? We don't want to be the no police. We want to get you to yes. How do we get you to yes? So how do we do that? And we have to really take a look at everything you're doing. And I think for those companies who want to have a larger swath of an audience between 6 and 18, it can be very challenging. It's why I kind of like, I like the mixed audience model in many ways, but again, that's costly to do. That's almost creating two environments. This is 2 games in one, right? 2 websites in one. But it's a solution that I think some companies who have the resources and bandwidth to do can operate.
Yeah, I think you bring up an idea that has a lot of people wondering is if you're building for kids and kids are already wanting to be on adult skewing platforms, that you might be sort of pushing them sooner into those if you're not talking to a 16-year-old differently than you talk to a 6-year-old. I think, Kate, you've done a lot of research on this space and where kids are spending time and how they might be behaving on adult skewing platforms. Do you have any other thoughts on this same subject or on how kids' behavior has changed because of this type of regulation?
I think that what we can all agree is that kids aren't dumb and they know that they can intuit that if there's a place on the internet that is age gated, that there's something really cool on the other side of that if they answer that I am an adult and I'm not a kid. And so how, as Donna's pointing out, like kind of not treating, someone and letting them in and sort of trying to blocking them out sort of becomes even more forbidden fruit and sends them into darker, deeper parts of the internet where we can't transparently help them make good decisions as they grow and mature. So I see there's a a note in the chat here, a question in the chat about companies who say they are not for kids, but kids are using their services. And what do you do with them? It's a tough question because Dona's pointing out that it's a lot of work to try to figure out how to not separate, but be inclusive of audiences. But I think the important thing for you as a inventor or product owner or a marketer is that you have to go onto these platforms and sort of bring your own compliance or your own thoughts around how you are going to handle your content and your audience according to your own sort of standard for appropriateness, and how you aren't going to use potentially data if you know that you're trying to go into these platforms to reach younger kids. Because there really is an incentive mismatch between what the big platforms have done and what you need to do to have a good working relationship with kids, with parents, and protect your own brand. So it's frankly, it's hard work back on you as a content creator, but that's the best thing to do is treat your YouTube channel like you would treat your website. Treat your TikTok presence like you would treat your own website, and protect and do the right thing by your brand for kids' safety and appropriateness.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And Shai, I think you had some other thoughts just how you might approach it from the company side of things, and maybe even an alternative viewpoint on that.
Well, echoing some of the comments already shared, I think first and foremost, COPPA is currently under review again by the Federal Trade Commission. And we are expecting probably sometime this year an announcement around proposed edits, which will then undergo some public comment, and then we might see another round of edits thereafter. So we're waiting now 1.5 years for the FTC to propose some changes, and it looks like it's going to take another 1.5 years before we see any new version of COPPA that goes into effect. But I do want to sort of, well, first off, regarding that process, I do think that it's critical, wherever feasible, that the FTC eases the requirements of COPPA, not make them more complex and more burdensome and more strict. Because to the point that some of the other panelists have raised, especially Kate, if you make it hard for kids companies, then the kids are going to flock to the platforms that are not intended for them. And in fact, it reminds me of a conversation, ironically, that I had with Evan Spiegel, the Snapchat founder, back in 2013. This was in the early days of Snapchat. Somehow he got my information. He called me up and he said, I understand that you're a COPPA expert. We have kids that are on our platform. We don't want them to be there. What can we do to address it? Can we get consent, for example, through a credit card? I said, sure, you can do that. But good luck convincing parents to give you their credit card to consent to their child's use of Snapchat. A week later, they implemented something called Snap Kids, which if you indicated you were under 13, they would push you into the Snap Kids environment, which was a watered down version of Snapchat. All it allowed you to do was take a photo and store it locally on your device. I called them back and I said, are you crazy for doing this? Because now you're showing the kids the alternative of what they get, a lousy watered down experience. If they're truthful about their age, this is not going to encourage age truthfulness. It's going to discourage it. It's going to encourage falsification. So to Kate's point, I think that's an important consideration. To Dona's point about age groups, she's right. I mean, look, if you have a 7-year-old or 6-year-old, and thankfully I have kids of all ages from 8 to 19, I don't let my 8-year-old still cross the street by himself, right? You're going to hold that kid's hand. But my 11-year-old, different story. And I think we need to think about different age groups, even under 13, as far as how they should be treated. Because look, from 0 to 6, those kids are likely going to need their parents' assistance to do a lot of the things within a child-directed app, whether it's signing up, right? So we can kind of safely assume that there's a parent present, but it's the tween group where the risk grows. Finally, on Denise's point about privacy awareness, I think I happen to agree partially, but respectfully disagree. I don't think privacy is very sexy and attractive. Still today, I think we have an increased reliance on technology today than ever before, especially in light of the pandemic. Zoom, for example, became a child-directed platform overnight, right? much to their surprise, have they changed their platform to be designed for kids? I don't think so. At least not yet. So I think that privacy is still secondary, unfortunately, and we need to do a lot more to get people to give significance and importance to privacy. For anyone who's seen the Social Dilemma documentary, it's terrifying. But yet people are still willing to give over their information for convenience.
Yeah, I know in the pre-chat when I was speaking with Dona just about her approach to things, Dona, you mentioned some interesting ideas about how just transparency about the data privacy practice for your company can make it so much easier for a parent to give consent. Do you have any advice for developers on how they can approach that?
I mean, I think we need to, again, this goes back to some creativity, right? I mean, we all deal with really long form privacy policies. And look, essentially privacy policies are a contract between the company and the user, which begs why we're allowing anyone under 18 to actually click that box to say, I've read and I consent, right? That's we could do a whole nother meetup about that. But I've taken issue with that over the years, however we are where we're at. But finding ways to inform users, parents about what's happening in the moment, just in time, upfront disclosures. That's what we want to see. However, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're also trying to create a robust user experience, right? So there's this constant conflict with regards to making sure that you're providing notice, that you're COPPA compliant, that you're compliant with whatever laws and best practices you need to be compliant with either here or abroad, and then it doesn't burden down the user experience, right? And that's a huge challenge, I think, for any company, right? And again, having the bandwidth and the resources to be as creative as you can be about that, right? But using short form privacy policies, making things easier to locate, easier to read. I would argue that probably the storefronts in a mobile app environment are probably a good place for companies to really talk about what their practices are. I know that it's become a marketing tool for companies to talk about what their app is all about. But when you look at what Apple at least has done with regards to privacy disclosures, I think it's quite helpful. But I think it's also a good starting place where people can take a look to see exactly what's happening, what data is being collected, what's being done. But we need to figure out a way to actually, I think, change the way people interact and the way that their expectations are, right? Because I think the cookie consent is a perfect example where we all see the banners, right? And people just click accept just to get to the content, right? They're not even reading it. How do we change the expectations? How do we, make it known that you need to actually just 3 seconds, 2 seconds, read this, right? Is it what we haven't seen is, text to audio, right? Do we have privacy policies being read out loud, right? What do we do? I think there's so many different ways to do this to inform users, but there's an educational aspect that I think actually starts with the regulators and educating the space, not just the users, but the businesses, and giving businesses the tools to really build that relationship and educate their users and build that trust. But finding different ways to make those disclosures that don't burden down the user experience is, I think, a challenge for all of us.
Yeah, and you touch on the App Store and some of the changes that Apple's going to be rolling out, and how that might affect a lot of developers. But also, Google had some changes announced today, which, with my experience, like getting rid of the cookies and saying, well, we have a different way to track you, is just introducing this whole new level of how can you actually protect people's identity and what's following them and prevent datification for children and families, which could follow them long into their lives. I'll just bring up, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think if we're talking about meaningful, consent, verifiable parental consent, part of the challenge is actually we just need to have meaningful conversations with parents. Take the consent part out, right? They actually need to understand what's actually happening. And by the time you educate the parent, the technology has changed. They've moved on, right? Their kids are light years ahead of them, and backdooring everything.
Okay, I've got to jump in. I've been listening for 20 years for all the reasons that none of us can get for verifiable parental consent, how hard it is, how much it costs, parents don't understand, kids don't get it, kids will fib. Nothing's changed. I've heard nothing change in 20 years in this argument. What I can tell the listeners on this is, whether they want to hear it or not, is that the rule is not going to get laxer. As much as Shai mentioned, it would be great. It isn't going to happen. If it does, well, I don't know, I'll owe somebody a nickel, but I don't believe it's going to happen. What you have now with California's law with CCPA is you have 13 to 15-year-olds protected. Virginia just passed its regulation. 13 to 15 are in that age bracket. In Europe, under GDPR, 16 is the age of consent. Each jurisdiction can choose to reduce that down to 13. And as all of us are saying, we've got all these wonderful, great new technologies, but we can't figure out at an age gate, you're 13 in one country and 15 in another, turn up child roll, turn up teen roll. Yes, we can. It's not that difficult at the end of the day. Credit cards are not, as Shai said, they're not a method that parents like to use. If you give parents a list of different methods to choose from, the credit card will get maybe 2% click on it. In the US, if you ask them for the last 4 digits of their social, a name and a zip code, you'll get 83% that choose that method over driver's license, credit card, print form, phone call. The rule says reasonable methods in light of available technology to ensure the person providing consent is a parent or guardian. None of the things anyone's implementing are doing anything of the kind to make sure that a parent-child relationship exists. You want to get tough? We all want to get, worry about how it's really going to be difficult, is wait till they tell us that actually matters, that piece of it. Right now, under COPPA, we have a beautiful sliding scale. It's gorgeous. People need to embrace it. Notice and opt out. No, notice and nothing. Just deal with the child. You can do certain things. Notice and opt out. No response from a parent. Notice and opt in. For goodness sakes, the child's giving you the online identifier to start with. If you can't get a child to click the link and pretend to be his parent, so you as a business can say you processed verifiable parental consent on a sliding scale that gets you most of the things you'd want to get done, then I don't know what we're all saying out loud. You get to public disclosure, sharing data, allowing kids to share their information. It's a risk. It's now a riskier feature set. In the US, we have COPPA. It tells us what are the feature sets. Under GDPR, it says you better figure out what the risk is, figure out how you're going to mitigate against it, and you have a few choices to choose from, of which consent isn't the only choice there. Legitimate interest might come into play and allow you to take an action. What I see coming is kids are going to have their own identity. They're going to have a way to log in. They have to have a way to associate to their parents, be able to come forward without having to share their parents' email address, but perhaps their own login that's already tied to mom, tied to dad in some way. They're going to have to verify themselves as teenagers under European law. So in the US, we can keep saying we can't do it, we can't do it. And what's happened? The rest of the world is jumping way beyond us. When the ICO's code and everything comes into place in 6 months, they're not going to fool around and wait for us to all say, I hope it gets easier. As Shai said, they're going to come out with a new rev on the rule. None of us expect it to get easier. We expect it to get tougher. If Markey and Castor have their way, they're going to yank the actual knowledge. Let's talk about that one. What happens if they move to constructive knowledge? We should be fighting the things we can fight back on as a group, as an industry. Don't do that to us. Don't bring us constructive knowledge. Let us do a better job with actual knowledge. And if we do a better job, there'll be less for them to tell us that we're not doing anything. Because right now, it's as if we all in industry keep hoping and praying it's going to go away, and it's not. And the regulators.
Denise, I'm gonna jump in and thank you so much for that.
Sorry
one
about
thing
my
that you
rant.
brought up. No, it's okay. Everyone's really passionate about this. One thing that you mentioned that I think is really interesting and that I've heard just from my friends who have kids is this idea of parents taking more responsibility now that they're in the pandemic and seeing firsthand what their kids are doing. And I think that parents stepping up is one real solution that you've all sort of touched on, that if you can educate parents as consumers and say you should care about this, then it'll make the lift for the developers who are providing those services a lot easier. On that note, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you can actually continue to make money in this space and what the options are for that. So Kate, I know you had a couple of thoughts on this, looking at advertising versus, in-app purchases and all those type of download options, subscriptions. What's the best path to monetization, or what do you need to think about when you're designing that for a kids focused platform?
Yeah, if you are trying to monetize your content, and that's great because we would want you to keep creating great content for kids. That's also another way to solve this problem is don't send kids into adult places because there's really cool stuff for them to do and something that's built for them. As Caitlin's saying, there's a bunch of options. You could have subscription, you could do in-app purchase, you could use advertising as a model, you can mix them all up. I think that the important things to know is that in each there's going to be some trade-offs, and that in each you need to think about, okay, how am I going to have a compliance strategy around my monetization strategy too? So not just how am I designing the game and the workflow or the play pattern of the kid, but also how I'm going to make sure that any money coming into my system is well gotten and also safe and appropriate. So as an example, if you decide to go down the in-app purchase, the IAP route, well, let's make sure that you have a mechanism for a parent to opt in and understand what needs to be paid for and how a kid can click buy, and have a parent have some choice in whether they agree to let their kid do that or not. If you have a community that's well built and having a parent as part of the process. If you think about having a subscription model, I would just say that subscription models have been really in vogue lately, but what we're seeing in the pandemic is that it really isn't a very sort of democratic way to include as many families as possible. The subscription fatigue among families is real. I'm thinking about now you have to subscribe to Peacock if you want to watch NBC, and now you have to subscribe to Paramount Plus, and you have to subscribe to Disney Plus, right? There's a lot of subscription fatigue. Kids content actually does drive stickiness of subscriptions in a lot of those streaming type environments. So I don't think it's going to go away, but consider that if you have a piece of kids content, that actually advertising is a way to make sure that it's accessible to lots of different families and is accessible as a way to get kids excited about the community and actually in, because if you put up that wall of payment, you're going to lose a lot of families right off the top. But if you do think about advertising as your monetization path, remember that when you invite an ad into your content, you are inherently including potentially some risk, and that those ads might not be appropriate for your audience, or that those ads might be leaking kids' data because of the mechanisms for ad delivery. So if you're going to have an ad-based model, you can do it safely. Not to plug our tech, there's a couple out there, but we do have a way to make sure that if an ad comes into your content, that we can make sure that no data is going to leak out of it, and that what is actually rendered, the picture or the video that comes in, is appropriate for a kid's audience. So the point is on advertising, you sort of have to have a special stack if you know you have a kid player, kid user in your content.
That's great. Thank you for that summary. I know there's a lot of people on this call from the community who have ideas about this and have found solutions to theirs. So I want to see if anyone in the audience, maybe Eldad or anybody else who's creating different platforms for kids, wanted to jump in on this subject and sort of start to open this up from the panelists to other people who are here. And after this question, the next thing I'd love to tackle is future platforms. A lot of people look at websites and apps as being a thing that we are solving right now, but what happens when we start to invite other sort of AI-driven platforms? So first, monetization. Anybody else want to jump in and add anything here?
And then I'd like to throw out a question on this topic related to what you just proposed, which is, we're seeing, having looked through hundreds of different kinds of business models and products, that increasingly the most important thing to get right is the user experience, right? If you create a compelling user experience or compelling content, users will come. And from there are all kinds of other ancillary business models that we're seeing be very successful, including merchandising, especially if you've got an IP that is very successful, offline merchandising, or combined physical digital play, where there's an offline purchase, which tends to be very successful, complementary to the product. And we've seen that with products like Osmo, Little Passports, and many others, coding platforms or coding robots, etc. So I think there's a combination of other things outside the traditional online and advertising and subscription world that we can be thinking about here.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thanks for doing that. Jessica, did you have anything to add?
I just had a question for the panelist. Do you have advice on mitigation strategies for online kids communities that trigger company action if parents were to pose as kids to contact other kids? Should we be background checking parents before allowing a child account to be created to prevent potential like sexual predators who are parents from being able to use kids' accounts to reach other kids?
Yeah, I can talk about that and like the need for moderation, not just moderation for keeping the predators out, but also like keeping your community healthy and vibrant, where you're keeping the bullies out, as an example, or keeping and really just keeping toxicity generally out of your community. Moderation is important, and it's hard. One of the things that we've found at SuperAwesome in operating our Pop Jam community is just by removing private chat, by having kids be able to post and comment and communicate with each other, just not in a one-to-one private way. That has been a really, really great way to minimize and mitigate the toxicity, because when you're part of a community, yourself sort of regulated by the community, on top of then having a really good moderation platform behind the scenes. But yeah, moderation is one of those things that shouldn't be an afterthought. It can be quite expensive, but there's some things that you can build into your product features that help generate self-policing inside of the community and keep toxicity out.
Yeah, and I don't think just relying on machine learning is enough, right? There's got to be some manual component to it where you've actually got some real eyes looking at things and not just solely relying on algorithms and machine learning to do it.
Yes, absolutely. Humans plus computers. I think YouTube has learned that the hard way several millions of times over.
One of the questions I heard was, should we background check all parents to make sure they're not pedophiles or predators? And I'm not a lawyer, but I would say that if I asked my lawyer, they would say no. Because if you're not going to do it and get it like perfectly right, which is almost impossible, I don't think that's on you to have to go to that level. It's more about having really good safety practices and procedures, and thinking about when somebody comes in to do a SOC 2 type 2 audit of your company and having the controls in place. Think of it that way. Do you have the safety controls in place to react, along with what everyone just said ahead of me, which is just mandatory that you have that. One thing I would like to say is your friends list, that a kid has, is typically parent understood. So with identity, you can take that child friend list and imagine if they could travel to many different communities, knowing that when it authenticates itself, one, the filters and the moderation have access to the very data about that child that it's trying to protect the child from saying. So smarter filters with real data, and friends that have already been pre-connected, associated, is really about how identity can play into all of this, so the kids can have some of those one-to-one conversations that she was talking about that are not not as easy to manage when they're people that mom doesn't even know who the two people are that are talking.
Thanks for the question, Jessica, and thanks to the panelists for responding. I want to start to open this up to other people who are working on these other platforms that Shai started to mention. So I know Martin from Soapbox Labs is in the audience, and they have developed a solution that's private by design for speech recognition for kids. So Martin, do you want to share a little bit about how you've approached this subject for your solution in Voice for Kids?
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin, and thanks to everybody. I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation this evening for me. I think it's morning for some people, but it's this evening for us over here in Dublin. I think, what we're facing in the voice space is a kind of education exercise, because there is a kind of assumption that when you bring voice into an experience, that there is a compromise required in terms of privacy. But actually, speech technology in and of itself is just a utility. It's an interface technology. It's only when you layer on top of that competing business models that you start to face issues around privacy. So the approach that we have taken is, well, kids deserve to have speech technology that's built with their needs in mind. So therefore, you have to place privacy right at the center of everything you do, and you build out a system based around that rather than from a competing business model. So I think these things are possible, but now we have to try and re-educate the market to understand that actually you can build voice into an experience and not have any data privacy issues whatsoever, because you can make it so that the voice data doesn't leave the device, or you can have it so that it's entirely anonymized and de-identified. It's never retained. It's only deleted immediately after process if it is in the cloud. So there are lots of different creative ways we can go about this, but I think there is a job to do now to re-educate some of the market around how these technologies can be used.
I mean, I think it's problematic if we're still having basic conversations about privacy by design, safety by design, security by design. I mean, if you're a developer, you've got to be thinking about this stuff on day one, right? And oftentimes when I talk to companies and organizations and developers who really are starting out, when you're getting your funding, build in money for your lawyer. Build in money for your engineers, right? Build in the money that you're going to need to really do this right from the beginning, from the ground up, as opposed to having to unwind it once you find yourselves kind of stuck. And figuring out also that the partners you pull in to work on your product, they got to get it right too. Because if they get it wrong, it's on you. You're liable. When COPPA was amended, that first party liability that was added changed the game. And it was new here. It wasn't new overseas, but it's new here. And we're still seeing companies that still don't understand the liability that's involved and the need to vet who their third parties that they're dealing with are.
Yeah, and I think when you're working on the platforms that are driven by data algorithms like voice, one of the challenges, if you're not using a solution that is designing like Soapbox Labs and other people in the voice space, is that you can't separate out the data of kids from some of those larger platforms. And so I think that people who are designing for those have to really think about that and make sure that they're being really careful in their design process to not contribute additional PII to that if they can help it. Because that's something that we definitely think about at Creativity when we're building voice experiences for big brands. I know Shuli had a question from the audience about UX. So I wanted to ask Shuli if she wanted to ask that question to everyone. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Fascinating conversation. And it's really interesting for me because I work a lot with companies thinking about UX and designing child-centered design. So this is like the other side. So my mind has to keep going back and forth. So I have a question for all of you. You've been talking about, the basics of privacy by design, how developers, how the advertisers, how the brands can look at it. I'm trying to shift your perspective to the users. So we're talking about children's understanding of privacy. We're talking about parents' understanding of privacy from a UX perspective. So I was wondering if you have any examples or ideas or vision about how might we make an interface, a UI, it doesn't matter if it's an app or a toy or voice, where the users themselves, when they log in, when they're there, they know that they are in a private and safe place. They know what data is being used, and then they can make that decision. It's not about check a box or signing like you said, like a contract, but there's something visual in the interface, like in old school TV when they say, we'll be back after these messages. We know now we're in commercials and now we're in a program, but we don't have that in the digital world. So how might we think about a UX experience for our users that will make them feel safe and private in a non-transparent way?
And are you thinking the children, the
Yes.
UI UX for the children or the adults?
Well,
right? Because a
obviously,
parent wants to see it safe, and a
both.
child
And
wants to know.
a child wants to feel safe as well. So if you go to Club Penguin back in the day, but now they have it again, you know, when they redesigned it, the fans, and you felt not safe, you could click on the Penguin Police, and the Penguin Police would come and say, did they have a penguin name? Did they have a bad word? And you can say what happened and you felt unsafe, and then that would go to a moderator. But you always feel safe because you know that there's a penguin policeman,
Right.
like in real life, that could help you in that situation. So it's something visible in the UX and the UI that makes you feel safe. So if we can have those things for the users, obviously the parents as well, but the users themselves, they would know what the system affords, what the environment affords. So that's why I'm thinking it's all about UX, and that's the education of the user, if you will. If it's not transparent, it's just there, you know what to do if you feel uncomfortable, if you don't feel safe, what information is being taken, and so forth.
So I'm just going to throw in, and then I know people will add more, and just, you know, rattling off some just-in-time notices, kid-friendly, using animation, making them part of the policies, helping them to sort of own the policies.
You have examples? I know, because we're doing this a lot. I'm part of an organization called Designing for Children Rights. It's a nonprofit global, and we keep trying to look for good examples. I'd love if you can send that to me, and I would help promote them, because companies are looking for good examples. How do we put this in our UX to make our users aware of us being, you know, keeping their safety, making it a good, safe place for them?
Yeah, well, I know we'll send you some information, and Caitlin, you can pass it along as well, but absolutely.
I love this topic. Thank you for the question and the thoughts, Julie. That's really a good point to also have the kids be someone that we're considering, of course, in all of this. It goes, we don't mention it as much because we have to think so much as adults, but at the end, that's who we're servicing, and we want them to become really mindful adults as well.
Can I make a one point on that question? I mean, first off, I think that certification badges also help to that extent. I mean, we have found that parents will use the badge if they feel that discomfort, or if they feel they want to voice a concern. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But I also think that, you know, as far as UI is concerned, and I agree with the fact that COPPA is going to probably become more strict, largely because of who now runs the Federal Trade Commission. There's a new chairwoman who errs on the side of being very consumer friendly. So I think we're leaning in that direction. But at the same time, the easier that we make it for app developers to get consent. I'll give you one example, right? Right now, asking for a phone number for the purpose of initiating a consent flow is not allowed under COPPA. Now, how do you explain that? Parents are most accessible and reachable on their mobile device. And so if we're not easily able to collect that piece of data as a means to reach out to them and inform them, forget even thinking about what type of consent they need to provide and what types of features are behind it, just as a means to reach them, then it's
But it really comes down to their ability, right, Shai? The laws that the companies have to follow for collecting phone numbers and sending things to phones. How can they get consent from the child to send something to a parent's device when the company is not looking at COPPA, but looking at other regulations? And you're right, it not being a quote online identifier under COPPA that allows us to initiate that way. But what I would say is we as a collective group should go to AT&T, to the carriers themselves. They know how to deliver a message to the parent. They know the systems, the folks that are helping to manage in the consent world know what devices are being used, right? They know what devices in play. So why can't we deliver a message to Verizon under the covers that says, Verizon, deliver this consent request to Johnny. He shouldn't have to give us mom's phone number, email, or anything else. He should be able to get to mom's speed. Where's the speed pass for Johnny to get to his parent without having to provide mom's PII of any kind in order to do it?
I think Denise is right. If we can get the carriers involved, it's a much easier path to be able to do this in a way that's efficient. Much the same way that the app stores, for example. And to your point, Shuli, I think Apple's new sort of privacy label notices on the App Store listings, those carry so much more sway than anything that the FTC will put into COPPA, because it's their ecosystem. So if they force it upon developers, similar to how they're not allowing developers use third-party SDKs, they have so much more of an influence than does the Federal Trade Commission with the nuances of COPPA, as do the carriers, to Denise's point, in the mobile.
They're also, as you know, in conflict sometimes with what COPPA requires us. They don't let us have, we're supposed to have a parent gate over a privacy policy and the like. They won't let anybody in the kids store actually do anything engaging with kids, which drives the kids to other places. And how about the fact that they know exactly who the children are because they've been set up by a parent, should work to our advantage. But instead, what we're seeing is overrides. Hey, parent, you can override the fact that we know your kid's 7, but you can go ahead and permission this thing that we know is 13 and over. So there's also a disconnect between the publishers, what the platforms, what they're trying to accomplish, and how the Apple platform is trying to protect the family. And at some point, those guys have to come together and agree to a common set of approach. And taking their nutrition label, we should all be learning from that and adopting that. I think that's a great point you brought up for people to look to for that UI look of how to communicate some of this.
I mean, part of what's going to drive a federal privacy bill is if the ecosystem can't come together on this, right? If the telcos can't cooperate with the platforms and address COPPA in a way that I think meets the test for certain regulators, there's going to be a push, right, to raise the age, to have a federal privacy bill that raises the age of COPPA. I mean, it's got to be resolved so that, because raising the age is not the answer. That doesn't get us to where we need to go. But that's the resounding conversation right now.
Well, and I think raising age on it, problem. It's two things, right? When you think of COPPA,
I'm going to jump in, and I just want to make sure that the community is able to ask their questions of the panelists too, because this is really a community-driven event. So, Ogi, do you want to jump in and share comments or questions for the panelists here? And you're muted, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple of comments more than questions. So I'm the CEO of Keen Research, and we do on-device speech recognition. So I want to kind of emphasize what Martin, I think, alluded before. But for majority of use cases in ed tech and kid tech, there's no need at this time to worry about COPPA and privacy. Most of these use cases can be handled on device. There's no need to send the speech data from the device if we're talking about mobile devices, mobile apps. So, for me, and then there's other reasons why actually on device makes a lot more sense, especially for kids. But just kind of want to emphasize that, and we work with a lot of companies in this space, from small startups to large Fortune 100 companies that use on-device speech recognition.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I think when creativity is designing a lot of electronic platforms, cost comes into play, because you need to have like a powerful chip to be able to power that. But you bring up a really good point. So many kids have access to their own personal device, which is an iPhone. It's powering all this computing power. And so why not harness that, but continue to keep it local so that you can, keep kids safe and not share that with a lot of people. Thank you for that comment. Giovanni, and would you like to ask your question? I see there's some stuff going on in the chat, but I want to invite you up, and you're new to me. So hi, nice to meet you.
How's it going? First and foremost, I want to thank the speakers. It's very interesting, all the information you guys are putting out here for free, basically. So yeah, I got a question regarding, you guys have all similar companies that do basically similar things in regards to the compliance of COPPA and all these different regulations to be able to come up with a good platform for kids to be able to have it enjoyable for them and so on. But yeah, my question would be, how do you guys exactly work with other companies? Do you guys do profit sharing, or do you guys have to get paid up front? And would I have to hire my own attorney also to be able to work with you guys, or how exactly would that relationship be formed? Yeah, I'm currently building a kids platform, and I think I'm gonna need a lot of this information, a lot of help for sure.
You're certainly going to want to reach out for probably the 3 safe harbors on the team, and also SuperAwesome, because and others like them that have kid-friendly advertising platforms. But Donna laid it out really nice at the beginning, that the safe harbor, we have a rule of conduct that we have to live by, right? We have to be as good or better in our recommendations and our auditing and our guidance. And I think all of us operate a little differently and have different vantage points. And perhaps if you have a conversation with somebody from each of those teams, you're gonna get a flair for, does it work for you? I know we will operate differently for a startup, and get a little more interesting in how we accept our payments than we might for a larger organization. But some also need more hand-holding. Will you need your own lawyer? I'm not going to say that you should use any of us as your lawyer. I do believe that most of us will certainly dramatically reduce the cost of your legal advice, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a lawyer that actually knows this stuff really well, that's not in a very large organization at a high ticket price. So I'll leave it to the others to weigh in.
Yeah, Donna, you want to jump in?
Awesome.
I think that, look, a lawyer at a firm is not going to provide you safe harbor, right? They simply cannot do that. But there is room, I think, for both, right? And you need to find what fits for you, not just for your budget, but for really what your end goal is, right? And finding the safe harbor that fits for you, and finding outside counsel. I mean, we constantly say, look, we're not providing you with legal advice. You should, if we draft a privacy policy or we're looking at provisions, run that by your outside counsel, right? Because as a safe harbor, taking on the liability of providing legal advice is not something that we do, right? We're providing you a service, which is very different than providing legal advice. However, it does pertain to a law. So I think that that's where it gets a little blurry sometimes. And we just always have to be clear about what it is that we're doing and the advice that we're giving. However, it is very possible, and we've all seen companies who have gotten by for many years without spending money on outside counsel. And it really does depend. There's no cookie cutter solution, but it really does depend on what your needs are. And as Denise pointed out, I think we've all found that for the smaller startups, there's a lot more work sometimes that's involved than the larger companies, right? They have the money, the resources, the bandwidth to do a lot more. So especially if you're just learning this space, I think we all try and educate the safe harbors we're working with, right? It's not just, okay, here's a solution, boom, implement it. We're actually trying to educate you as a developer about what it means to be in this space and explain all of the challenges and risks, but also, again, get you to yes, right? We want to work with you and make sure that you create a product that fits the ecosystem that we're all trying to adjust to and to comply with.
Shivani, you'll find also working with programs like ours that will have a much better handle on how to operationalize the requirements, how to actually put them into practice, some limitations you'll face in terms of technological limitations, and potentially how to work through those issues to get compliant. I also know to help comment on Kate's behalf that SuperAwesome offers some free resources around COPPA education, and that might be a good place to start if you have budget constraints.
Yeah, and I think also one of the other benefits that we haven't touched on when working with safe harbors is that we have a direct line to the Federal Trade Commission, right? Any of us can pick up the phone and talk with them anonymously on behalf of our companies and ask questions about, well, what do you think about this, right? And I think that that's a huge benefit. A lot of law firms are not going to do that. They can't. Some can't, some won't, but we are obligated almost to have those conversations on behalf of our clients, and that's a relationship that you can leverage when you're part of a safe harbor.
And as well, Donna, we can innovate methods, right? So it's within the safe harbors to be able to innovate verifiable parental consent methods, approve them. So certain companies may have methods that nobody's even thought of just because of who they're dealing with and what they're, how they come into contact with the users that they're serving, let's say.
Yeah, right. So rather than jumping through the hoops of submitting an application for approval of a process to the FTC, safe harbors can help you get over that hurdle.
Yeah, and based on the conversation, my ideas actually fits in perfectly with a lot of the compliances But yeah, that's great. Thank you for the information.
Mhm.
Kate, did you want to add anything from SuperAwesome? And then this will be the last comment because I know panelists have been sitting here for an hour and a half or more, and we want to let everybody get off to the rest of their days. But Kate, why don't you share a little bit about SuperAwesome?
And I just wanted to say that, like, anytime you're going to be launching a new product, you're going to have lots of different things you're going to have to consider, which is, from product design to user experience to marketing, and you're not going to, frankly, find one person to come and just do the whole thing for your compliance. So definitely tap into some free resources, and definitely tap into the safe harbors when you're ready. But there's lots of helpful information that we can provide, and lots of us can, to get you started.
Perfect. I want to thank all the panelists and all the participants also for sharing thoughts here and great questions. And really, everybody has built up so much expertise. Even if you're just starting out on building a new product, you are an entrepreneur and you're paving a way as someone who is a consumer or a parent or has a really great idea. And this community is so great at fostering those ideas and making them a reality. And it's thanks to everybody's time and the contributions of their backgrounds that they share and guiding everybody else that we're able to continue to be better and to drive this industry in the right direction. So Shai, Denise, Kate, Dona, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all this wisdom. We will definitely make sure that if people are looking to reach out to you, we can get them over to you. We're not sharing slides after this, but we will make this recording available. So that will be put into the meetup and the LinkedIn groups. If you're not a part of them, you can join them and see all of those comments and get access to them there. So thank you again. Really excited for the next one, which is going to be in April, at the end of April, and the subject matter will be about how you can test products for kids in a post-pandemic world. So we will put that on calendar and send out the invite and look forward to seeing you in about 6 weeks or so. Thanks again.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.